field of archaeology. In 2024, it became an institute of exceptional national importance for the Republic of Serbia. Scientific research activities are financed by the Ministry of Science, Technological Development and Innovation of the Republic of Serbia. The institute implements scientific research projects in the domain of prehistory, antiquity, and medieval archaeology in Serbia, and in numerous cases with the framework of international projects and with the using of modern multidisciplinary researching methods. One group of the Department of Prehistoric Archaeology dedicated to the Metal Ages, whose members are presented on this slide, during the last 2 decades has conducted numerous systematic and rescue excavations in Serbia, and as the most important for this lecture, those related to the end of the 4th up to the middle of the 2nd millennium BC, or better to say, from the end of the Copper Age to the end of the Middle Bronze Age, according to the current chronology of the Metal Ages Serbian prehistory. At the invitation of my friend and colleague Dr. Žarko Tankosić, since 2040, I have been participating in a couple of the surveys and excavation of the Norwegian Institute in Athens on Iraklia and Paros Islands in the Cyclades, as well as on Gurimadi archaeological project at Evia, so that in many cases I have the opportunity to get approach to the material culture of prehistoric communities in the Aegean region. During the researches of the caves in the Cyclades, but especially during the research and making of documentation of the findings for the multicultural site Gurimadi in Evia, I noticed numerous parallels between the pottery production from the late Neolithic and the early Bronze Age in Greece, with chronologically parallel cultures in Serbia. This lecture will not only focus on the numerous similarities in the material culture of prehistoric communities in the Central Balkans and those in the Greek Aegean, but attention will be also paid to some of the new findings regarding to the ritual practice of burial during the early Bronze Age and Middle Bronze Age. We begin this presentation with studies that deal with the relation between the Aegean and the other parts of the Balkans during the Copper and Bronze Ages. The Aegean Anatolian Europe by Jan Bozek from 1985 and Josef Maran, Kulturwandel auf dem Griechischen Festland from 1998. Since the Archaeological Institute in Belgrade during the last decades of the research obtained the new data related to the development of the Copper and Bronze Age culture, the time has come to update some old hypotheses in the light of the new discoveries. For those who are not familiar with these issues, and in order to better understand the cultural movement during the Copper and Bronze Age in the Balkans, we should briefly refer to the geomorphological characteristic of the Central Balkans, where most of the territory of today's Republic of Serbia is located. The geomorphology of Serbia is characterized by several separated geomorphological areas and ecological systems, of which the most important are the lowlands plain of Vojvodina, which represents the southern fringe of the Carpathian Basin, the dynamic mountain regions, and the transitional hilly zone, which stretch south of the Sava and Danube rivers. The transitional hilly area stretch from the south of the Pannonian Plain or to the right banks of the Sava and Danube to the Cer mountain in the west and the Šumadija region to the east. The mountainous part of the Serbia is divided into eastern, western, and southern portion. This region, besides being rich in forests, also yielded deposits of tin and copper. The eastern mountainous region is characterized by the large deposits of copper, iron, and gold ores. Rudna Glava, the oldest copper mine in Europe from 5000 BC, was also discovered on eastern Serbia. River courses of Great and Southern Morava River divided Serbia into the eastern and western. Iron Gates represents the large tectonic origin gorge in Europe. If you have it on mind, the only logical direction for cultural transmission into the territory of Serbia is to follow the valleys of the major rivers, the Danube from the north to the east, Sava and Drina rivers from the west, Nishava River from the south, and southern Morava from the south. The relief of the Central Balkans and his hydrography suggests that cultural movements toward the Aegean world and back logically must lead via the courses of the Vardar and Struma rivers from the north to the south, or from the direction of the east following the Danube and along the western coast of the Black Sea. Since recent decades, there have been current theories that the Neolithic package most likely arrived in southeastern Europe following the Danube River fall, or via Struma and Vardar rivers in the second version. This can also refer to the following periods of the Copper Age. Aforementioned Bozek and Maran studies explain very well the cultural phenomena related to the end of the Copper Age in the Balkans. In Central European archaeology, this phenomenon is called Baden-Borela's Černa Voda tree culture. It spread from areas between the Danube and the Tisa River in Hungary along the river courses that cross the Balkan Peninsula to the Central Europe to the west and the Aegean into the south. The most characteristic find of the material culture that we associate with this phenomenon are richly decorated liths, which, apart from the Carpathian Basin and Southern Balkans, in a large scale also exist in the Aegean and Cyclades, where they are called frying pans. After 2000, Archaeological Institute carried out revision research of Bubanovo Selo in Niš, one of the most important tell sites in Serbia, where we unearthed remains of settlement of Baden-Černa Voda tree culture, which is not evident in the previous excavation. This important prehistoric settlement was first investigated by the archaeologists from the United States before Second World War. During the economic sanctions against Serbia in the 90s of the last century, settlement was destroyed without rescue excavation for the purposes of highway construction. 90% of the site was destroyed. Only 350 square meters of the settlement, which included about 51,000 square meters, remained for revision researches. Our revision excavation carried out by Archaeological Institute from 2009 to 2012 contributed to determining the cultural stratigraphy which started from the early Neolithic and lasted until the Middle Ages. Thanks to the clear archaeological context, we are able to obtain the absolute date, which has led to more precise picture of cultural stratigraphy on this site. On this slide, you can see the duration of Černa Voda tree culture on the Central Balkans. This favorable position of the Bubanovo Selo site suggested that the influence toward the Aegean could also go through the southwestern Bulgaria, or better to say, through the valleys of Nišava, Struma, and Mesta rivers. In pottery production at the Buban site, the findings of Černa Voda tree culture clearly stand out in the cultural stratigraphy, and you can see some of them on this slide too. A new picture of chronology of the Copper and Bronze Age in the Central Balkans was created thanks to the large series of absolute dates that led to the correlation and alignment with the current chronological system in Greece and Bulgaria. Firstly, thanks to the numerous projects and archaeological research led by my colleague Dr. Aleksandar Bulatovic, together with Maya Gori and Mark van der Linden, in Radiocarbon Journal number 5 from 2020, they offer a new solution that the Bronze Age in Serbia also began around 3000 BC. According to this, the updated picture of the development of the Bronze Age culture in Serbia is now largely in correlation with the periodization used by the Greek colleagues. The early Bronze Age in Serbia is divided into 3 main phases and 1 intermediate phase that lasts from approximately 3000 to 2000 BC. Early Bronze Age 1 in Serbia is parallel to Early Helladic 1 and 2 in Greece, while Early Bronze Age 2 in Serbia lasts during the transition from Early Helladic 2 to Early Helladic 3, while Early Bronze Age 3 in Serbia is parallel to Early Helladic 3 and the Middle Helladic 1 phases. During the Early Bronze Age 1 and 2, only 2 necropolises was discovered in northwestern part of Serbia. They were created under influence of the Vinkovci culture that come from the direction of the Carpathian Basin. From early Bronze Age 3 period, or from 2300 to 2000 BC, we also have 2 necropolises with skeletal burials in the north of Vojvodina, while only 1 necropolis was found in south of Serbia, but exclusively with cremated deceased. It is the Ranotovac necropolis that was investigated by Archaeological Institute in 2012-2013. As we say before, during the early Bronze Age III phase, at the very north of Serbia, 312 graves was discovered at Mokri necropolis and 285 graves at Ostojićevo necropolis. They belong to the Mureš culture, which flourished around the Mureš River flow, its central fringe of the Carpathian Basin. The Mokri necropolis was published following the excavation in 1971, and based on the grave inventories, a clear distinction can be made in burial rituals. The Mokri necropolis has richer graves in compared to the Ostojićevo. Grave 200 represent one of the richest in the terms of the grave goods. It contained bronze pins of the Cyprian type, a torque, bracelets, pottery, and necklace made of the animal tooth and snail shells, while the hair ornaments were represented by spiral pendants and tubes made of the thin bronze sheet. Gold ornaments are common for the older burials. The metal grave goods are mostly limited to the copper sheets, and very rare thin bronze goods are represented primarily by the daggers. The Ostojićevo necropolis was excavated during the 80s, and it's poorly published. Smaller number of the graves belonging to the early Bronze Age III phase and mostly to the Middle Bronze Age. The graves are significantly more modest. My previously mentioned colleague Bulatovic and I have started working on its complete publication. Thanks primarily to the Professor John O'Shea, who dedicated a significant part of his career to research of the Mureš culture, now we deal with 6 absolute dates from the Mokri necropolis and 12 absolute dates from Ostojićevo necropolis. Differences between these two necropolises were obvious. In contrast to the previously mentioned grave 200, at the Mokri necropolis, the richest grave at the Ostojićevo necropolis contains solely 3 ceramic vessels, and one of them also contained a copper dagger. Burial rites are absolutely the same in both of the necropolises, except for cremation burials and one cenotaph documented at Ostojićevo. The later phase of Ostojićevo necropolis was marked by the fusion of different cultural influences: Fušeboni culture, encrusted pottery culture, Latin culture, and Geraint cultures. However, regarding the number of the child burials, Ostojićevo necropolis represents a unique case in the Middle Bronze Age in southeastern Europe, with a total of 105 child burials, buried inside large ceramic pots or pitos. Thanks to this custom, children's skeletal remains was preserved in a large percentage, which is not the case in the other simultaneous necropolises. The funerary custom of pitoj burial is absolutely unknown in the prehistory of Southern Balkans. That is why the Ostojićevo necropolis represent a unique case in Serbia. But unlike the Central Balkans, this kind of burying of the deceased during the early Bronze Age and Middle Bronze Age was widespread in the northern regions of the Aegean as well as in Crete. On this occasion, we will present only some of the numerous examples of burial in pitos during the early and Middle Bronze Age in Greece. During the early Bronze Age, such graves can be seen at Heropigadokolaides necropolis, then the early Bronze Age Pella and Lenax necropolis. An almost identical custom of burying the deceased in pitoi or in 2 joined large pots also exists in the necropolis in Ostojićevo, but only in the case of the children burials. During the Middle Bronze Age in Greece, the pitoi burials custom continues, and for this occasion, we use images of the Sisi and Gula necropolis. Since all of the graves of the children buried in pitois and Ostojićevo necropolis belong exclusively to the Middle Bronze Age, it's logical to conclude that this custom must have come to the north of the Balkan Peninsula from the direction of Greece somewhere around 2000 BC, or better to say, at the transition from early Bronze Age to the Middle Bronze Age. Because all of the presented, but also following the burial custom which are valid from the southern Romania and western Bulgaria, we believe that the logical direction of the influence of the pitos burials probably went via the western Balkans via the western Black Sea coast and further upstream to the Danube River to the southern fringe of the Carpathian Basin. We will still stay focused on the end of the early Bronze Age when a drastic change in funeral custom occurred. At the end of the early Bronze Age and the beginning of the Middle Bronze Age, the cremation of the disease first appeared on the territory of very south of Serbia. Since funeral customs are the distinctive characterization of a community, so they are the less susceptible for changes. It was stayed not clear enough for us what reason motivated the Bronze Age population in the Central Balkans to take such a radical step and start to cremating their deceased. Discoveries of the oldest necropolis with cremated deceased in Ranotovac in the south of the Serbia, and especially thanks to the absolute date we get from the necropolises around Bor and Zaječar town in northeastern Serbia, today we are convinced that this shift of the burial rites occurred due to influence from the direction of the south of the Balkan Peninsula. During the rescue archaeological excavation for the construction of the highway, the Ranotovac necropolis was discovered, and Dr. Aleksandar Bulatović published results of this project in the edition of the British Archaeological Report series in 2020. Ranotovac necropolis consists of the two separate groups of the cluster of the graves, northern and southern, positioned at a couple of dozen meters from each other. Northern cluster of the graves is devastated up to being completely unrecognizable. Remains of cremated deceased after removing from the pyre, stored into the shallow pits and covered with pots. After that, circular stone construction is built around the grave pit. In all of the burials, some of the grave gifts are present, such as a different kind of pots, braziers for smoke production, and rarely stone artifacts. Such a kind of grave goods show closest analogies with pottery found from the 22B phase of Kastana's site or 4B phase of Sitagrovi site. In the time when the necropolis was discovered, it was obvious that it was aroused under the influence of the Armenohori culture and is probably represent the northernmost necropolis of this cultural manifestation so far from the Greece. This is also shown by the absolute date that coincide with the dates valid for the skeletal burials and Mokrin and Ostojićevo necropolises, but in the case of Ranotovac, these are represents the first cremated graves in this part of Balkans. That is why we are convinced that the population with characteristic of Armenohori cultural group most likely brought a new burial custom to the Central Balkans with them. If we take a look at the map of the distribution of Armenohori culture from the end of the early Bronze Age, we can see two groups of the site. The northern group, which includes the south of Serbia and the north of the Republic of North Macedonia, and the second group, which was formed in the south of Albania and northwest of the Greece. This also proves that the funeral custom of cremation of the deceased reached the Central Balkans from the south and from there gradually spread to the north of the Balkan Peninsula to the edge of the Carpathian Basin. We will discuss about this issue later. Our theory is also confirmed by the discovery of early Bronze Age Kriarici necropolis in Halkidiki, where circular stone construction around the cist with contained urns with the remains of cremated deceased are placed, which, according to the Aslanis, belong to the early Bronze Age. This means that necropolis of Ranotovac, according to the stylistic characterization of pottery that we saw on the previous slides, must have been created under the influence of presented burial practices that arrived from the south. The further evolution of such burial practice will be shown in its full development during the first half of the second millennium BC in northeastern Serbia. During the Middle Bronze Age, the territory of northeastern Serbia was settled by the communities that initiated intensive and large-scale copper exploration and production. Those communities cluster spread around the large copper deposit between the Iron Gates and the Crni Timok River in the vicinity of today Bor and Zaječar towns. After the 80s and 90s of the last century, two of our famous academicians, Professor Dragoslav Srević, who discovered Lepenski Vir, and Borislav Jovanović, who discovered Rudna Glava, the oldest copper mine in Europe, provided us with the first information of the Bronze Age communities in northeastern Serbia. Thanks to their research, we acquired the first data about metallurgical society, settlements, and especially necropolises, which are represented by the circular stone structure with cremated individuals buried in urns. These two academicians excavated two necropolises and two settlements from the Middle Bronze Age. Borislav Ivanović discovered the Trnjane settlements and necropolis, while Dragoslav Srević discovered Magura necropolis and Banska Stena settlement. 3 decades after that, and in the light of the new cooperation between the Institute of Archaeology and Museum of Mining and Metallurgy in Bor, which started a decade and a half ago, a couple of new settlement was discovered, as well as a new necropolises and 3 copper smelting installation in vicinity of Bor town. Following the inclusion of the Austrian Archaeological Institute into the international project Bronze Age in Northeastern Serbia, Metallurgy Settlements and Necropolises, started in 2017, revision excavation have been concluded at Trnjane, Banjska Stena and Čokanica settlements and Hajduča Česma necropolis in order to collect a fresh sample for absolute dating purposes. As the best example of our achievements, thanks to the series of systematic surveys and archaeological excavation undertaken since 2012, we presented 2 maps of the Middle Bronze Age sites. The first one from 2004 and the second one concerning the same areas from 2020. The new collaboration with the Austrian colleague Dr. Mario Gavranovic, a series of new absolute data connected with the aforementioned sites and several other sites in vicinity contributed to the fact that now we deal with the time frame in which Middle Bronze Age settlements and necropolis lasted, and very interesting data to understand better the actually economy of these communities. Also, in the same time, new data of metallic slag analyses were acquired, as well as the detection and compression of lead isotopes from the copper ore in the samples from the vicinity of Bor and in numerous artifacts from the different museums collection in Republic of Serbia. It should be highlighted that the new phase of the research of the Bronze Age metallurgical site in the vicinity of Bor started back in 2012 on Ružana 1 and 2 sites with humble resources and excellent results achieved. Those investigations resulted with the discovery of the first Bronze Age copper smelting installation in Serbia. It was dated between 19th and 18th century BC. It is very interesting that right next to each of the 3 discovered copper smelting installation, at least one of luxurious beaker was discovered too. According to the absolute date, last discovered copper smelting installation on the site of Čokanica would belong to the slightly younger period. Besides the remains of a copper ingot furnace, significant concentration of charcoal and slag was recorded, as well as a drop of the pure copper which fell on the ground during the smelting process. One beaker attributed to the Verbičoara 4 group from Banat and southern Romania origin was discovered next to the smelting place too. As you can see in the title, the copper smelting installation at Čokanica site is dated between 17th and 16th century BC. The analysis of metallic slag from copper smelting content indicates that sites from the vicinity of Bor town were utilized for the production of copper ingots and their further distribution toward the metallurgical centers. Interestingly, not a single remains of a casting mold was recorded, which indicates that the tin bronze was not produced in this part of Serbia during the Middle Bronze Age. Until the autumn of 2024, we will deal with 5 identical necropolises from northeastern Serbia, 4 of them discovered around Bor town and 1 discovered next to the Zaječar town. During the years, we were convinced that low representation of the grave good is confirmed by the facts that solely one of the urns from the Trnjane necropolis with remains of the pregnant woman contained a single bronze blade. Same situation we have at Hajduča Česma necropolis, where solely one grave contained 1 bronze pin. It should also be emphasized that each of these necropolises, except Magura, was located very close to the settlement where we discovered metallurgical activities. At the same time, a new picture of distribution of Middle Bronze Age settlements south of Bor town or in the vicinity of Zaječar town was produced through the research survey in the vicinity of the Roman imperial palace of Felix Romuliana in the village of Gamzigrad. The systematic surveys were conducted in 2007 and 2008 by the Institute of Archaeology in Belgrade and German Archaeological Institute in Berlin. The surveys have shown that the wider course of Draganov stream, which is the right tributary of the Crni Timok River, contains a large concentration of Middle Bronze Age settlements, and Banjska Stena hill fort represents a central place. Except a couple of solitary burials, only Magura necropolis represent a significant sacred place in this area. Magura necropolis and the fortified settlements of Banjska Stena were the last project of our professor Dragoslav Šević before his early death in 1996, and therefore, unfortunately, the results are not adequately published until today. The current Serbian-Austrian project contributed approximately with 60 absolute dates in 7 years, both from the necropolises and excavated settlements. Due to the significant amounts of metallic slag and the contamination of the soil with sulfur, preserved bones for IMS dating are quite rarefied. The absolute dates from Trnjane, Borsko jezero, Krivski kamen, Šokalu, Patran, and Hajdučar Česma necropolis have indicated that Middle Bronze Age communities inhabited this area from the end of the 3rd millennium and last up to the 16th century BC. Judging by all the parameters of cultural development available until 2024, we thought that these Middle Bronze Age communities were poor and conservative in the context of existing network of exchange that flourished within the Carpathian Basin. Such a shortage can also be observed in the burial rites, with rare grave goods or exotic bronze finds. Except for the exclusive cremation of deceased, the pottery assemblages is represented in humble forms and almost completely undecorated. This is not the case in the contemporary late Muresh culture and Vatin culture necropolises in the southern fringe of Carpathian Basin, which you can see in the beginning of the presentation, with numerous lavishly decorated grave goods. If we observe the Magura necropolis, a sepulchral Middle Bronze Age place in which the tombs of Roman Emperor Galerius and his mother Romula were erected at the beginning of the 4th century AD, we can see that the funerary architecture of Middle Bronze Age is identical to the necropolis in the vicinity of Bor. Yet the urns are usually stylistically and typologically different, with lavish decoration and characteristic recipient-shaped handles. Also, pottery and bronze grave gifts are more represented in compared to the necropolises around Bor. One of the goals of our project was to acquire absolute date from these necropolises too, but unfortunately, out of the 7 analyzed samples, only 2 days were obtained. The dates are significantly later compared to the necropolises in the vicinity of Bortan, although it should not be excluded that the population at Magura necropolis continued to bury their dead after the mythological communities around Bor disappeared. The Hajdučar Česma necropolis, situated near Bor town, has been systematically researched since 2017 and through the 3 excavation campaigns. In the Trench 1 of 2080, 4 graves were discovered, one of which the oldest on the necropolis and dates back to the very end of the 3rd millennium BC. Infants of the 1st and 2nd category were buried in all of the 4 graves discovered in this campaign. Of the grave goods, only 1 spindle whorl was found. In the next campaign, in 2019, the 2nd cluster of graves was investigated, in which 10 graves were discovered. The deceased were buried in urns of various shapes, some of which were seen from the first time in this area. These graves were also poor in offerings, so that, apart from one bronze needle, only a pair of spindle whorls and 2 ceramic clamps inside the urns were found. Anthropological analyses show that a deceased belonging to the people of all age groups in these graves. After that, my colleague Mario Gavranovic and I came to the only logical conclusion that the members of the metallurgical communities in the vicinity of Bor were equal in terms of the funeral rites, very poor in terms of the grave gifts, That's where found the dead members of the community, as well as in terms of material culture within the investigated settlements. We present these claims at several scientific symposiums dedicated to this topic. And then in October of the last year, we decided to investigate one more isolated group of the graves, the very western border of the necropolis. In this trench, we also discovered 10 new graves. Everything indicated that the situation from the previous two research campaigns will be repeated in this case as well. Again, the pottery found and accessories in the graves show the different stylistic and typological characterization in compared to the previous discovered graves in the necropolis. Findings from the group of the graves show more similarities with the pottery production of the Middle Bronze Age Vatin culture, which developed on the southern part of Carpathian Basin at the north of Serbia. However, that was not the end of the surprises. During the extraction of the bones from the cremated deceased from the soil in an urn from grave 20, a ceramic beaker characteristic for the Vatin culture was found. Apart from this beaker, the handles of which were removed in order to pass through the opening of the urn, two ribbons made of the thin gold sheets were also discovered, which were not exposed to the fire during cremation. When the museum conservator cleaned and stretched these ribbons, it was clear that they were hair ornaments. Since the anthropological analysis had not yet been completed, as well as the absolute date from the graves from 2024, we are not sure yet if we deal with the female grave, but it was obvious. However, new surprises followed. In the urn of the grave 21, which was part of the double grave inside the circular stone structure on the southern edge of the grave cluster, during the soil flotation, we find a set of miniature bronze beads and one stone pendant. Bronze beads are biconical and square in shape, while tubes with ribs are not in the same dimension and diameter. For now, this kind of jewelry set is absolutely unknown on the territory of Serbia during the Bronze Age. In the same urn, we find the remains of two very young children. In a neighboring urn from the same grave construction, a miniature dimension bronze single-edged knife and one ceramic beaker was found as well. We will not be surprised if the anthropologists identify again the pregnant woman in this grave, such was the case in Trina necropolis. The closest analogies from these items we can only find in the graves from the Bationia necropolis and Dunja Varoš necropolis, which belongs to the Vacha culture that developed on the territory of central Hungary during the Middle Bronze Age and chronologically overlaps with the youngest grave to the Hajdučka Česma necropolis. Our research in the field of archaeometallurgy, which we carried out in a cooperation with Professor Matthias Mehofer from Vienna University, showed that technology of copper metallurgy in northeastern Serbia is significantly different from the technologies that was used in Alpine region in Central Europe. We believe that metallurgical communities in northeastern Serbia exclusively produced copper ingots and export or trade them to the other areas of southeastern Europe, but interestingly, not to the Aegean world. On the other hand, finished products made of the thin bronze, of which there are very few discovered in northeastern Serbia, arrived in Central Balkans exclusively from Southeast Europe. During the investigation of the Feldvar site in Vojvodina, a very important settlement of the Vatin culture, casting molds and other items used for the production of the shaft hole X discovered in the floor of one of the houses. The influence that came from the north during the Middle Bronze Age are obviously, if you pay attention, in the decorative elements of the pottery, which now more remains on the pottery from the Carpathian Basin. Since the current Serbian-Austrian project is still going on, we are looking forward and expect to collect more valuable data to better understand all the process of the cultural and trade networks of exchange, which going through the Balkan Peninsula during the prehistoric Bronze Ages. Our next excavation starts in May And we plan to investigate 3 more graves construction which belong to the previous mentioned isolated group of the graves at Hadučas Česma. At the same time, we take the first step to start a new collaboration with Dr. Sevi Triantafylou, who analyzes human remains from the aforementioned Kriarici necropolis, and we are very impatient to see are we right in our conclusion of connections between the Bronze Age communities in Central and South of the Balkans. New technologies connected with strontium isotope will be of the greater help. As a conclusion of this presentation, we can say that the cultural influences from the Greece and Serbia and vice versa during the Copper and Bronze Ages fluctuated depend on the historical circumstances. Our research in the find of the burial custom prove that crucial changes in burial rites from the end of the early Bronze Age come from the direction of Aegean, most likely with some new population that brought them to the Central Balkans during their quest for copper minerals. During the early Mycenaean culture period, numerous finds of bronze weapons and jewelry appears on the territory of Serbia. Lots of swords, daggers, double axes, decorative pins, and jewelry were found in hoards and graves from the end of the Middle Bronze Age and during the Late Bronze Age. It is also obvious that they come from the Greece, but that will be the subject of some other lecture. Thank you so much.
Let's move on to the questions. Who wants to start this? Yes, there are many questions about it.
Can make it start. Thank you, Kappa. That was an impressive lecture, and I can relate because some of the material
Yes.
also associated
Very
with
common with it.
parts of Bulgaria. I was wondering, so we present so many cemeteries. Do you have any settlements associated?
Yes, yes. Around the Bor town, when we find some metallurgical center, necropolis is next to them. Sometimes they overlaps.
Okay.
It's very strange. Why they buried his dead next to the place where the copper smelting?
So pretty much every cemetery has every necropolis.
Yes,
has
every necropolis, except Magura. Magura necropolis is not close to the copper smelting set, but it was younger. It was a couple of 100 years younger.
Okay, because we have a similar sort of distribution of, again, comparable types of necropolises with comparable finds, although most of them have been robbed, so we don't have like the full data set. And we're considering them as remnants of mobile societies rather than established settlements. So that's interesting thing to trace at some point. How do they...
I mentioned that we have a problem because lots of sulfur, because the smelting process and everything, because it's sulfur ore, copper sulfur ore was exploited. And we have a problem because it's very hard to find appropriate unburned bones for IMS dating. But we have a couple of cases where we find some pits with very well preserved bones, and lots of bones belongs to the pigs, domestic pigs. That means that it's settled. It's not nomads, because pigs is usual for in settled communities. Not.
And if I can have a second question. In one of the necropolises at the beginning, you presented a necklace. There was only a drawing of it, but it looked like it was the beads were made of amber based on parallel.
No, it's not amber. It was stone pendants. Stone pendants, but in one necklace, our anthropologist from university discovered human rib.
Oh.
It's very strange, human rib. Yeah. They put them on the necklace.
Okay, thank you.
Other question?
Yes, thank you for a very interesting lecture. You mentioned several burial practices that seem to move northwards from the Aegean. I was wondering if there has been conducted any isotope analysis from the bones found in these burials to determine whether they are local or they have migrated.
Now is there is new technology about strontium isotope to identify from which this person come. But we still don't have it because I met the one scientist from Belgium who do the big database about these issues. And now he was in Croatia, and because he spread his investigation and data base, he will very soon, maybe next year, he will start to work in Serbia, and we will offer him the samples, and we will know. But now we don't, because it's cremation. You can't find DNA. It's very hard to identify from where they come. Only if you have some like this bits from the. If you have some kind of jewelry or something, you can identify from which they come. But they're poor graves. That's they don't have offerings. That's the problem. You have lots of graves with very small number of offerings. And that's why we are stuck. We can go to, but we have a luck to find this part of necropolis which have some imports, but it was from the. We believe we wait from C40 dates, but according to everything we find, it must be younger than previous graves in previous excavation campaigns, because it looked like, and they have offerings, because previous grave doesn't have, and they are very old. From these necropolises or very beginning of 20 millennium. But I will not be surprised if we get today that it was younger.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yes, but we are very, very impatient to see that are we right with our theory that it comes from the Greece, because it's obvious. Because until the late Bronze Age, there is no skeletal burial in Serbia at all. They conquer. Cremation conquer custom of cremation conquer whole Serbian territory until the late Bronze Age. In the middle Bronze Age, they stop with inhumation, just start to cremation.
Other questions?
You talked about cultural influence going from south to north, but the other way. Are there any traits or trends that goes from the Balkans to Greece?
I speak with Pascalis yesterday. It's very strange. We thought that they come from the Aegean to the Central Balkans, and in the Middle Bronze Age they forgot his roots, and they start to trade with the Carpathian Basin, because we don't have. Back information. There's no. We can find products from the Central Balkans in Greece.
It's actually quite the opposite. If I remember correctly, most of the, let's say, axes, Middle Bronze Age axes from northern Greece, typologically belong to the Pontic area, to the Black Sea area.
Okay. Yes, but how you see on the beginning of the presentation, we have some connection. In a late Copper Age, but in early Bronze Age and Middle Bronze Age, everything comes from the Greece. Everything comes from.
Sorry, what about the tumulus culture? That started in the Balkans.
I write a book about one tumulus culture necropolis in Serbia in a bar series. You can find it from 2019, and I know a lot of that, but. Tumulus culture also come from the Central Europe during the late Bronze Age, very beginning of late Bronze Age, and it's also from the Central Europe, not from the South.
But then it's coming from Central Europe,
yes,
going
yes,
down
yes,
to Greece,
yes, yes.
because I mean, we don't have any tumulus culture in
The last
Aegean.
finds of tumulus culture in Serbia was one necropolis in Niš. That's the southern point of tumulus culture penetration. Southern of Niš, we don't have. And there is one necropolis in Montenegro on the border of Serbian-Montenegro border, and that's it.
We have some in Bulgaria, but they stopped with the Rudop Mountains. It doesn't go
Yes, they didn't go southern. They stopped there.
And the metal finds in the Pontic area, we consider them, there's no evidence, and actually there's some sort of evidence for the opposite. They're not locally produced, they're travelers. So
Yeah, it was.
they're just found there, but they're coming either from up top.
And then again, if I remember correctly, they have a weird distribution, like mostly in coastal sites.
Yes,
Like
exactly.
around the
Coastal and
inland
river.
central Macedonia, for example, it seems not to be part of this game.
Exactly.
And I think that crucial thing is our collaboration with Austrian Archaeological Institute, because this item of the they realized that copper smelting production in Alpine region, copper smelting production in northeastern Serbia was totally different. That's why that's a new proof for us that it must come from, not from the Alpine region, they come from somewhere else. But if we follow the burial practice, we conclude that they come from the Greece. And it was enormous number of sites, metallurgical sites. Whole community was around Bortown. Whole community is just mining and copper smelting, but only product ingots. They don't have tin. They don't have tin bronze. Only copper, and they trade them, but to the Carpathian Basin, not to the Aegean. That's very strange. They come from the south and start to trade with the north. But we need more more proofs for that.
It was interesting. You named the Almenhore or Kondukov, and it's at the Varda River. Of course, the river and was very important as a connection.
Trade routes. Yes. But that Ranutovac necropolis is the only one in Serbia and northernmost. And after that, we have a new site, because in the eastern Serbia, northeastern Serbia, we have a gap around 800 years until the first graves appears. We don't have material culture, anything. It was absolutely empty. And then such a new population who knows how to recognize the copper ore arrive there and start to explore it again. But in Rudna Glava copper mine, it was proved by IMS data that it started in 5000 BC. It was the oldest copper mine. And after that, we have one data connected to the end of the fourth millennium, and after that, nothing. That population goes somewhere else, and whole the area of northeastern Serbia was depopulated. 8 centuries.
Do you have any evidence for conflict?
No, nothing. I think something happened, maybe some climatic changes or something, and they must go somewhere else. And after that, they never come back, and the whole area was forgotten.
At what time is that?
Around 300 and 200. Around 28th century to the 20th century BC. Absolutely no finds, nothing. they have lots of copper and everything, but there's no people who know to recognize the.
I have a question. Can you see any of these influences you described on from the Aegean moving northward? Can you see them outside the cemeteries? Are there any evidence? And if not, why do you think is that?
In northeastern Serbia, settlements next to the necropolis was so bad preserved because geomorphology of the terrain, it was magmatic rocks, and because that during the rains and everything, lots of material was there's no drainage because it's very tough rocks there, and lots of settlements was only in horizontal stratigraphy and very bad preserved. We never have such a, I don't know, house if it's not a pit house. Pit house is the only architecture we found. Nothing else, nothing else. But we have lots of walled up everything, but everything was dislocated, and that's the because the geomorphology, magmatic rocks.
About copper, and they're very important. The last year, I mean, you have a lot of discussion all over in Sweden and about that. But do you think that the mining activity was, the miners might have been an independent professional group?
Yes.
I was thinking about in Aigunar in Stara Zagora area. And the miners' graves were they were often buried inside. Do you have that also in Serbia?
No, because the in the beginning of 20th century, industrialization started in a Bor town, for example, and there is one big hill which is discovered during the 18th century. One Austrian archaeologist identified that hill was full of the ancient mines from prehistory to antiquity. But in 1903, industrialization started. French company buy the rights for exploitation, and they destroyed whole that hill. It doesn't exist anymore. And that's why we don't have now we're searching for everywhere to find some old shaft or something, but it's hard to find because the main source of the copper was in today Bor copper mine, and it's disappeared. That's pity, but also we are convinced that the whole population work on that, on copper mining and copper smelting, and maybe they have stock breeding, nothing else. But southern, in 30 kilometers from the south, on Zaječar region, I show you on the slide, we have plenty of agricultural settlements. Only 2 or 3 was copper, but of 50 settlements, only 3 are copper smelting. They are agriculture. They forgot to mining. Yes.
Maybe they lost the clients.
Maybe they lost the interest. But there are probably, you see on Magura necropolis, they have more offerings in metal, and maybe they start to trade. But it was a little later.
Any other questions?
Well, mainly, but for personal conversation.
Please, please.
All right. So in this case,
Okay.
thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.